on this main screen is the information for translation, but I'm curious, do we have anybody in here today that is going to need translation? And Julia, if you want to relay that, I'm not sure who all we have in here, but if you want to relay that in Spanish as well to see if we have anybody.
¿Necesita alguien que le traduzca en español?
Okay. That'll work. If we do get anybody in there, we can start Julia on that, but we'll leave her where it is for right now, if that works. Well, perfect. Well, thank you again for joining us. This is our 4th virtual table talk. We've been able to do one every quarter, and we're super excited to bring them to you all. We've had a great turnout, more than I think any of us were expecting. So we're super excited to bring this information to you and have you guys show up. Today's topic is perfectionism and the gifted. We are happy to see you here, and our best hopes are that you come away today with a better understanding of your gifted learner, and maybe some strategies to help them through what we are all quickly learning is something we all possess in different ways, for sure. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tiffany Beecher, and I am currently the GT specialist at Prairie Heights Middle School, Brentwood Middle School, and Early College Academy. And I'm going to take time and let each of our other specialists on here today introduce themselves really quick. Pam, we'll start with you.
All right. I am Pam Smith. I'm the GT specialist at N.K. Hyman, Chapelo, Dos Rios, Maplewood, and Meeker.
I'm Jody Mueller. I am the gifted and talented specialist at Bella Romero K-8, Jackson, Scott, and Shawsheen Elementaries.
I'm Linda Johnson, and I'm the GT specialist at Franklin and Northridge High School.
I'm Amy Grapey, and I'm the part-time gifted education specialist at Greeley Central High School.
I'm Julia Rivera, and I'm at McAuliffe, Madison, Billy Martinez, and Centennial.
Perfect. I think besides Ms. Rosso, who she is going to lead us today, I think that is the rest of our specialists. Perfect. So we can skip to the next one. So today there's a lot that's going to be covered, and it might bring up questions or some things that are on your mind that you want to ask. But we're going to ask, make sure you keep those questions or comments general. Try to refrain from using the names of students, schools, or teachers. Be open to new learning. There's going to be a lot that Ms. Rosso presents today, and it's great information. So be open to that. Take any specific questions you might have or concerns to your child's specific GT specialist. And if you're not sure who that is, we do have a slide at the end for you, so you have that information. This is being recorded today. That way we can share it out afterwards, and anybody who might have missed it, you can tell them, hey, your specialist is going to be sending you this. It was great information. Look out.
You okay? What's wrong?
Okay, I am going to turn it over to Ms. Rosso.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mrs. Beecher. So I am Mrs. Russell. I'm the gifted ed specialist at Chapelo, Winograd, Fred Chartis, and Montfort. I'll be leading our discussion.
Do you know where you need to be?
What?
Do you
on
know
the
where you need
topic
to
of
be?
perfectionism. So perfectionism is something that many gifted individuals, a trait that they carry, both students and adults alike. You may even hear some familiar traits about yourself today. Who knows? I know I can relate to some of these for sure. What we're going to talk about today is clarify the distinction between what perfectionism is and what it isn't, because that distinction is important for us to understand. We'll talk about ways to recognize the difference between striving for excellence and when it crosses over into perfectionistic thinking. We'll also learn a little bit about how perfectionistic thinking affects our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. We'll round out our discussion today with a few strategies that might be worth considering, that you might find helpful as you help maybe yourselves and your child manage perfectionism. Because ultimately the goal is not to eradicate or fix perfectionistic thinking. It's simply a trait that we carry, but we can certainly learn how to manage it so that it doesn't manage us. And that really is the ultimate goal. So let's dive in and look at some of the most common ways perfectionistic thinking can manifest itself. There are certainly others beyond what we see here, but these tend to be the most common that we see most often. First one we see here on the left is the person who tends to have to start something over again and again and again. Anytime there's a perceived mistake or something that doesn't go the way they planned, this must be terrible and I have to start all over. Your child might erase something in their paper so much they rip a hole in it, or they might just throw baby and bathwater out and have to start over again and again and again. And they kind of get stuck in that rut and are unable to break free from that and just keep on working to try to get something finished. Other perfectionistic thinkers tend to overcommit. So these are the folks that have a really hard time saying no for fear of not being liked, not being accepted, fear of maybe making people upset. And so there's and commitments that they pile onto their schedule that there become way too many spinning plates in the air. And it becomes more and more difficult to get things done on time, to be places on time. And the load just becomes more than anybody can possibly carry. Another thing that creeps into perfectionistic thinking oftentimes is procrastination. And these two topics often go very much hand in hand. For procrastinators who are dealing with perfectionism, there's a fear of the outcome and a fear of not knowing how people are going to react to what I did or what I turned in or whatever it is I'm trying to do. And that fear kind of could paralyze us. And so it's much easier to intellectually, I know that if I turn something in late or not at all, I'm going to get a bad grade, but I can accept that because I can control that. Whereas if I put my heart and soul into something and don't get the feedback I desire or expect, that's not something I can even deal with. So I kind of get stuck. And so it's important to know that oftentimes procrastination is not due to laziness or disobedience or apathy. It could very much be rooted in perfectionistic fear. So let's talk about that a little bit. As more clearly define perfection.
I am so sorry. I'm going to stop for just a second because in the chat we have somebody who, so we have had people join that need Spanish. So
Yes.
I just want to make sure, I didn't want to have you get too far in.
Thank you. Let's go back to.
Yep, it just popped up. So Tiff, you're going to handle that, right? And Tiff, will you talk to them about how to get that? And Julia?
You're going to hear 7th graders walking down the stairs above my office, so I apologize if it's noisy. I know Julia put into the chat, she's the one that said, does anybody need Spanish translation? So here is how to get it. If I could just, if you do need Spanish translation, just let us know so that we can get that started for you. Because I know that that chat came from Julia. Okay, I think we might be okay.
All right. I'll skip ahead here to
No translation?
Is it working?
We can turn it on. It's not on right now because I don't know if anybody needs translation, if they can put it in the chat that they need it, because that message was from Julia to the chat.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, guys. This is always the tricky piece, is making sure we have it translated if it's needed. Okay, go ahead, Denise.
All right. Let me jump to, okay. So we're working on defining perfectionism. Contrary to popular belief, perfectionism is not the desire to be perfect. Instead, it's rooted in fear. Fear of being embarrassed, fear of being laughed at, fear of not being good enough, fear of being found out. A lot of our gifted individuals live with what we term imposter syndrome, meaning there's this constant heavy dread that they carry with them all the time. Well, everyone's been telling me my whole life long that I'm so smart and I'm so talented, or I'm so athletic, or I'm so creative. It's only a matter of time before they figure out I'm not as great as they keep telling me I am. And so living with that dread can be very heavy and weigh people down. And so all of those types of fears is how we define perfectionism. And a lot of them are just part of the human condition, but when it kind of crosses over into more of a paralyzing, debilitating aspect, then that's when we probably need to be a little bit more concerned and maybe help coach our kids through that. because perfectionism does really lay on a continuum. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to strive to be our best. Striving for excellence and putting the extra effort into that is what often separates the successful people from the lesser successful people. So that's a very healthy thing, but it can creep down the end of the continuum towards being debilitating, and employ some strategies maybe to help our kids with that. We'll talk about some strategies here in a little bit. The other thing to remember about perfectionistic thinking is that it is simply a personality trait, but it's not a fixed trait. It's not like eye color that isn't going to change. It really is fluid and can absolutely be managed if we employ some strategies and commit over a long term to using those strategies to help manage them. And one of those things to maybe think about initially in terms of how, what kids hear us saying is maybe how we communicate our thoughts about perfectionism. So if I know I'm a perfectionist and my child keeps hearing me say things like, I am such a perfectionist, that's a pretty fixed definition without a lot of hope for improvement. But if I just tweak my words a little bit in my sentence and say something more along the lines of, oh man, I'm really doing some perfectionistic thinking right now, I should probably change that. Likewise, if I call my child, you are such a perfectionist, okay, it's fixed and there's not a lot of hope. But if we could say, hey, I notice you're kind of stressed out about something, this project coming up. Are you having some perfectionistic thinking? Let's talk about it. That opens the door for more empowerment and more hope for managing it over time. So that's something maybe to consider, is just the vernacular that we use in our sentences, because they can be very powerful. So we know that some degree of perfectionistic thinking is healthy and useful, but then it can tip into the end of perfectionistic thinking that is less helpful and less healthy. Here are a few common scenarios that you might be able to relate to. The person who's just trying to strive for their best and is working on a report or a project for school is going to do their work, get it all done, and feel very good about what they accomplished, whether or not the outcome is what they want it to be. But the perfectionistic thinker is going to start this over so many times and get bogged down in all the details and not be able to separate the important details from the less important details. And then they just get stuck in this quagmire, stay up all night, stress out about it, snapping at everyone along the way, and feel terrible about what they turned in at that point, even regardless of the end result. Or maybe there's a test coming up and the person who's striving for excellence is going to use their notes and do their studying and go into the test, be a little nervous because nerves are good, but feel really good about the outcome no matter what it is because they put in their all. Whereas someone who's got some unhealthy perfectionistic thinking is going to cram all night. They're going to walk in exhausted, heart racing, palms sweaty, feel terrible if they aren't the best, the first 100%. Because in a perfectionistic thinker's mind, it's very black and white. I'm either the best, the first, 100% perfect, or I'm an abject failure and no one's going to like me and I'm a terrible person, and then it just goes from there. Maybe someone goes out for a sports team or learns a new instrument or tries something new and they enjoy the journey. They enjoy the mistakes and the growth that result from that along the way. Whereas a perfectionistic thinker might just start to obsess and spend every waking moment practicing this new skill. And if our team doesn't win every game, or if I don't beat the school record or whatever, I am a failure. So you can kind of see how everyday scenarios can really play out very differently, whether someone's got a healthy striving for excellence attitude or maybe not. And it can feel to the perfectionistic thinker who's got a sort of more debilitating sense of perfectionism, it really can feel like you're being swallowed by a giant monster and that you have no means of controlling it because it is controlling you. And that can translate into certain thoughts and feelings and actions. So let's talk a little bit about how it can affect us. The voice in our head, for I think probably all of us, is usually not very kind. But if you're dealing with perfectionistic thinking that's traveling towards unhealthy, it can really be cruel and it can be loud and it can be incessant with thoughts like, well, why do this at all if I can't do it right the first time? Or I can't believe I did that. I'm so dumb. No one's going to want to be my friend. I am not even worth it. This is ridiculous. How could anyone want to like me? And on it goes. That can translate into feelings of embarrassment and shame and that dread we talked about earlier of imposter syndrome. It's just a matter of time before I'm found out that I'm not so wonderful. Everyone keeps telling me I am. And it's this constant feeling of shame and dread and just waiting to be rejected or laughed at or embarrassed in some way. And because that's not controllable, you can't control other people's reactions. The one thing you can control is your routine and the schedule and any other things that you can grab onto to control. And when those things get interrupted or shifted, sometimes that can really throw a perfectionistic thinker for a loop. And you might notice some anger coming out in your child if something in their life or daily schedule changes. It could be a lot of things, including maybe that perfectionistic fear that they're dealing with. These are also folks that will, they turn in something and the teacher has all these glowing, wonderful comments and one little comment about maybe a comma out of place. And that is the only thing the perfectionistic thinker will see and pay attention to and remember. So the glass always being half empty is kind of something they live with. And it's hard to see the forest through the trees and recognize things in their entirety, positive with the negative, and value both. There's a constant comparison. I have to be the best. And if I'm not, then something's wrong with me. And so they're always comparing everything they do with everybody else to make sure they are on top and the best at all times. And again, that fear can sort of paralyze them at times. And that's where procrastination comes in. Procrastination, either I can't get this started or I've gotten it started, but to me, every single little detail is of equal importance and they can't prioritize and get the important things done first. And if there's still time, maybe do some of the other desirable things. It's all equally important. And that's just too much for anyone to handle, but they can't seem to separate that. So how can we help our kids manage all of this? If this is what they're going through and thinking and feeling, maybe there's some strategies that could help. Again, keep in mind the goal is not to eradicate perfectionism, but we certainly can help kids control it so that it doesn't control them. So here's a number one strategy, not as in the best, but as in the first that we're going to talk about. Calling it out and just talking about it. It's just simply a trait. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with anyone, but it's hard not to feel like there's something wrong with you if it never gets talked about. And so if we just call it out in the open, I'm sure a lot of us as adults in kids' lives can relate to at least some of this. So we can absolutely share our own personal experiences out loud with them and have them share theirs with us and just make it part of our family ongoing conversation. This is a lifelong trait. And so these conversations can certainly continue as needed for the whole of your child's life. It's important to listen. We like to talk a lot about our own experiences and share our wisdom, but it's also important to ask questions and listen back. And if you notice your child kind of spinning his or her wheels with the perfectionistic moment and that anxiety is increasing, maybe asking a more big picture goal, like, hey, I noticed you're stressed about this project or this audition coming up. Tell me a little bit about what your desired outcome is. What do you want it to look like? How will you know you're successful? What's your goal with this? And that can help maybe bring down some of the anxiety and bring this into a little bit more of a concrete way of thinking of it. Call out, what's the worst possible outcome? Let's talk about that. Describe to me what the absolute worst thing that could happen is, and let's deal with it. Again, it can bring it down out of the ethereal and be into something more concrete that they can hang on to and discuss and take a little more ownership and control of. If you notice a lot of anxiety going on, maybe you could talk them down, teach them how to talk themselves down levels of stress. So if you think of a 5-point scale, level stress worth a level 5 would be a situation where your life is in danger and it will end no matter what. So your car is stuck on the train tracks and there's no way of extricating yourself and the train is just feet away. You're going to die. Okay, that's worth a level 5 amount of stress. Is anything in our day-to-day lives a level 5? No. Okay, is this a level 4? Level 4 is my life might end if I don't act fast. So my car is on the tracks, the train is coming, I can extricate myself if I do it now. That's a high level of stress. Is anything in our day-to-day lives a level 4? No. Okay, so now we're at a 3. Once in a blue moon kind of things like the state test that happens every year, the CMAS, or your wedding day, or the annual audition for the school musical. That's worth a level 3 because it doesn't happen very often and it's really important. Level 2 stress could be those things that happen occasionally, like, I don't know, end of chapter tests that occur, a couple times a quarter or whatever. They need a little extra stress, but not worth a level 3. And level 1 would be just those day-to-day stressors that life brings. So if you can teach kids outside of a stressed out event, how to talk themselves down, just that conversation is instantly relaxing. And if you can kind of practice that when things are peaceful and calm, then they can rely on that muscle memory, so to speak, when they get into an escalated moment, and can maybe, then you can kind of coach them then. But if you wait till that moment to have this conversation, it is not going to work. But it's something worth practicing in those calm moments. Another strategy, number 2 of 3 we'll talk about today, is just simply modeling. Talk out loud, think out loud as you experience your own perfectionistic thinking. Oftentimes perfectionists are so stuck in their fear that they won't allow themselves to take risks. And you can't grow if you don't take risks, so they get stuck. So model for them risks that you're taking, even little ones are of value. Think out loud about how you're thinking through this and how you feel about it, and encourage them to do the same. Challenge each other. Okay, we're all going to take 3 risks this week, and they can be small because they're all valuable. And then we'll talk them out with each other at the end of the week or whatever. Same thing with mistakes. Mistakes are good. That's how you grow. We need them. If you can't figure out how to climb off the horse that you fell off of, then you're never going to get better. So make a game out of mistakes. Hey, I made 2 mistakes today. How many did you make, or whatever? So demystify it, bring it out into the open, because it's just a part of life. But we have to walk that talk with our kids. We talked a little bit ago towards the beginning about watching our language. Watch your language between a fixed definition of perfectionistic thinking versus one that has some hope for growth. So my child is not a perfectionist, but my child is experiencing perfectionistic thinking, has 2 different connotations. So I think if we're aware of that, we can help our kids. This all gets at the idea of growth mindset, which is a term that we're hearing a lot lately. And it offers a lot of hope for that change and being able to learn how to manage something like perfectionism. So I think the questions we ask our kids and the things we praise kind of help define whether we really are supportive of growth mindset or whether we're more fixed. For example, hey, and you took your test today. How did you feel about it? As opposed to, how'd you do? What grade you get? Did you get better than everybody else? Who won the game? Did your team win? Not that those questions aren't important and valuable, and of course you're curious about it, but if that's what the kid hears you ask all the time, then that's more of a fixed mindset. There's not a lot of hope for praising their effort. Whereas if you ask them, hey, how hard did you work on this? Did you overcome any mistakes? Did you take any risks? How did that feel? Good for you for taking risks. Good for you for, experiencing something new. Praising that more than asking about the outcome can kind of help facilitate the growth mindset. The final strategy is helping kids manage that voice in their head. So the voice in the head that we talked about earlier that is saying things like, why do it if I can't do it right the first time? And I'm so dumb and no one's going to be my friend and everyone's going to find me out. It gets louder and more cruel as time goes on, but you can't eradicate the voice in our head. That's part of being human. There's nothing that says you have to listen to it or pay attention to it. So if we teach our kids how to turn down the volume or press the mute button when that voice gets going, then they can refocus their attention on being productive. And that could easily be just a fun, 2-minute game with each other. So if you're my child and I share with you something my inner perfectionistic voice is telling me, and I ask the child, okay, press the mute button. Here it is, blah, blah, blah. They press mute. And then we start giggling. And then we change roles. Okay, you tell me one of the sentences that your voice says to you, and I'll cut them off halfway and say mute, and do that often as needed. To teach them just to silence that voice, they don't have to pay attention to it just because it's talking at them. And if you can teach them how to replace that negative voice with something that can refocus them and get them going again, just a short little mantra like, you got this, keep going, whatever it needs to be, can be really helpful. These strategies aren't, the end all be all, but they are certainly ones for you to consider. And I think the power behind any strategy you try to use is to what extent you commit to it. Like we said earlier, this is a lifelong trait and we can teach kids to manage it, but it's like with anything, when you taught them how to tie their shoes, you taught them how to ride a bike, it took ongoing practice and feedback and redirecting and helping out and giving advice. So I think if this is just part of your family conversations over a long period of time, maybe over a lifetime, what's the harm in that? And you might see some real good power from those strategies. So we talked about a lot of things today. Hopefully what we come away with is a better definition of understanding that perfectionism is not the desire to be perfect, but instead it's fear-based of the outcome and how I'll be judged, and that it can affect our feelings about ourselves and how we act and the choices we make and whether or not we get stuck and procrastinate and all. We talked about just having honest conversations about their experiences, your experiences, praise things like mistake making and risk taking, make a game out of it, teach them how to silence the voice in their head by using a mute button and redirecting their thoughts to something more productive. Hopefully those things can be of use to you and you might find them helpful over time. There are so many resources out there I'm sure you're aware of. These are ones that I used and that I oftentimes recommend to parents. Those 2 books that you see at the top, the first one, What to Do When Good Enough Isn't Good Enough, is one that I recognize for families to maybe use as a book study for kids through about 6th grade. And for our older kids, 7th grade through 12th. Perfectionism, What's Bad About Being Good is another good one for our older kids. You can find those on Amazon if you like. Our Colorado Association of Gifted and Talented has been putting on weekly Facebook Live events where they're bringing in guest speakers to talk about many issues that gifted individuals face. One of them was all about imposter syndrome and another one was all about perfectionism. So that link is there for you. You will be receiving a copy of this slide deck so that you can click on whatever links you'd like to. And we also included the other links that we've been including throughout the year that are a wealth of resources for all kinds of issues about the nature and needs of our gifted kids. Sometime today, if not now, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to complete this parent feedback, I believe one of my colleagues is gonna, if they haven't already, maybe add that link in the chat so it's available. So when I click to the next slide, you'll still have it. But we value your feedback. These table talks are brand new this year, so we're constantly evolving as we go based on your thoughts and your needs. So we really appreciate you taking the time before the day gets away from us to go ahead and complete that parent feedback form for us. It's short, it's quick, we promise. In a moment, we'll start answering some questions, whether there are questions in the chat or whether you have some. As a quick reminder, if you have a specific concern about your child, we ask that you take that to a private conversation with your child's GT specialist, and we'll show you all their email addresses here in a moment. But if you have a generic question about the idea of perfectionism, we would love to answer that now. Please just keep the names of schools out of your question and faculty and students as well. So as you're thinking of your questions, here is our list of our district GT team. So if there is a specialist that works with your child that you would like to have a more conversation with, there are our email addresses for you.